We are so honored to be hosting contributing writer and former Paris bureau chief for the New York Times. She's been based in France since 2002. She is in New York today, but that's good because otherwise it would be middle of the night. She is the author of The Seine, which is tonight's featured book, The River That Made Paris. It was named as a Barnes & Noble nonfiction choice, and the New York Times reviewer, the great Edmund White, called Sciolino a graceful, companionable writer, someone who speaks about France in the most enjoyably American way, having led one more beautiful and amusing wreath on the altar of the City of Light.
Thank you so much, Daniel, and thank you, Erin. You know, I have to tell you, I know Milwaukee a little bit because when I started out in journalism, I started out in the Chicago bureau of Newsweek magazine before I moved to Paris for the first time, and we covered 11 states, and Wisconsin was one of them. And you know, I was like the hick version of Emily in Paris. I arrived in Paris from Chicago, but without her wardrobe. I came with my sheepskin coat and my the 1970s version of Ugg boots, which served me not at all well in Paris, but did when I covered the Iranian Revolution. Well, thank you for welcoming me back to the Midwest. I come to you having grown up in Buffalo, New York, and I realized when I moved to the Midwest that I had gotten back my Buffalo accent, which is not too different from where you are there.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sue Conrath asked you how the cleanup of the Seine is going for the Olympics.
Oh, the cleanup of the Seine for the Olympics. Well, Sue, you must know that the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, would like to make the Seine swimmable in Paris by 2024. Pas mal, as they say, not bad. In the last two decades, there's been a massive effort to clean up the Seine. Laws have been passed, regulations imposed, so that there's much less industrial dumping of waste into the Seine. There are a lot more regulations and restrictions for boats, both houseboats and barges along the Seine. And it used to be that there were only 4 species of fish in the Seine, and now there's about 33. So the Seine is getting cleaner. And you know what happened during confinement? You know, in Paris, we had real serious lockdown. You couldn't leave your apartment for more than 1 hour and not go more than 1 kilometer from where you lived, and you had to carry around a written justification saying why you were even out on the street. And all boat traffic, except for the police boats, stopped on the entire length of the river. And the river in Paris became so clean that in certain places you could actually look in the river down and see the bottom of the river. Yeah.
Well, we've gotten like 700 thank yous and mercies. We have a couple of folks have asked about what's the state of Paris now with COVID? Like, what's it?
It's still pretty grim. As we speak, the French government is still trying to figure out how to save Christmas. It's been very, very serious for restaurants and cafes, which opened up and then closed down again. You know, for a while, starting in mid-March, just about everything was closed except essential services, meaning basically food stores and pharmacies. Just about everything else was closed, including museums, bookstores, you know, hair salons, all the rest. And this time when they tried to lock down again, bookstores, for example, you'll appreciate this, Daniel, protested saying books are an essential part of life and they are a necessary part of life and we have to open up again. But as in so many parts of the United States, commerce has been terribly affected. Businesses have gone out department stores are empty, and it's quite dramatic. France has a fabulous healthcare service, and France is a small country. It's only the size of Texas, and it's very centralized. So unlike the United States, that put together a patchwork of different regulations throughout 50 states, France was able to have one rule for the entire country. And, if they needed, if there was a lack of an IC unit in one city, local authorities literally put the patients on a train and send them to another city, to a hospital. But it's a war. We're fighting a war.
Yeah. We had Sarah would like to ask about the adjustment required to adapt to living in France as an American.
Oh gosh, I wrote a whole book on it called La Seduction, how the French play the game of life. It's all about how the codes are so difficult to learn. And from the most basic codes, like I didn't know when I first moved to Paris that you're supposed to say bonjour to everybody. You go into a store, you don't just go into a store, you go to a store and you say bonjour. You get on a bus, you're supposed to say bonjour to the bus driver. You enter an elevator, you're supposed to say bonjour. This is why I don't know if any of you saw Emily in Paris, the TV series, the Netflix series. She meets the concierge in her building, the gardienne. She doesn't say bonjour to her. No wonder the woman hated her guts. She should have said bonjour and then brought with her, some Trader Joe's extra thick, chunky peanut butter as a present from the United States to Paris. So it takes a long time before you know the codes. Again, if you saw Emily in Paris, you saw how Sylvie, the mean boss, tells her, Emily, don't smile. People will think you're stupid. And it's really true. Parisians don't smile to strangers on the street. And this is why when we're in a metro and people don't smile at us as Americans, we think, oh God, they're really mean. But it's just, they do this thing with the regard, the look. It's why all those old French movies, they go on and on forever. And all you do is like look at each other. Aaron probably has lots of those movies at the Alliance Francaise. You could just look at each other. So a lot of adjustments.
A lot of movies, they have a film festival. So somebody asked about, I think this is back to the COVID question, about when will Paris open up for her to go back? What are the travel, like what are the guidelines that they're using that they're going to open borders?
Not until the numbers go way, way down. And it's not a French decision, it's a European Union decision. And the European Union has taken a very, very strong view, saying that unless you are a permanent resident of France, well, I mean, other countries as well, but regarding France, you have to either be a permanent resident or a French citizen. Otherwise, you cannot come to France. And boy, did I ever try to pull every string I possibly could to be able to get my daughters to come back to France this summer. I mean, we've lived in France for 18 years. It's now our family home, and our kids couldn't come back.
Wow. Anne asked, how do people feel about Macron?
Mixed. Macron came in as the young wunderkind, youngest French president, and very smart, but rather arrogant. I've interviewed 4 presidents: Giscard, Chirac, Sarkozy, Hollande. The only time I ever met Emmanuel Macron, he was impertinent and refused to answer my question. So not a grand séducteur, not a great seducer, certainly. It has hurt him that he is so smart, and he knows he's smarter than just about everybody else in the room. But the key to being a leader, whether you're an American politician or a French politician, is making contact with the other and creating common ground. And he hasn't done that. And so even though he's very smart, he's done a lot of good things. He is not beloved.
Michelle wanted to note that the Professor Vassar, Aaron Vassar, Andrew Tallon, who digitalized the Notre Dame interior, is a native of Milwaukee. So that was just a shout out, I guess.
Was it native? I beg your pardon?
Of Milwaukee. It's from Milwaukee.
Of Milwaukee. Oh, what a great story. That's great.
I had somebody, I told her to email me to put it in a note, but I didn't. Marguerite wanted to note that she, let's see, she attended LaSalle, Illinois. The city of LaSalle was named after LaSalle, who was born in Rouen, and she got a charge out of the front cover of my high school annual with a cover of the drawing of the Cavalier, named after Rene Robert Cavalier, Sieur de Salle. All our sports teams were called the Cavaliers, and the dance team for girls was called the Judgettes. I hope it's not anymore.
I love that. I love that because I went with a group of Americans on a cruise of the Seine. You know, I wanted to look at the Seine through the prism of Americans. Oh, what do we have here? A picture of, who's that a picture of, Marguerite? Is that your son? Is that your boyfriend? Is that your husband?
Sure. We'll unmute you for a second. All right, Marguerite. You can, I'm going to let you speak.
Okay. The word Cavaliers is on the boys, all the sports teams. And then the Cavalettes, the dancers, they're called Cavalettes. And then and the town is LaSalle, and it's on the Illinois River where he did, and I got a big charge out of it because you said he was from, I have to say Rouen because I know I can't pronounce it right. And so I thought you might get a big charge out of the Cavalier on our
I get a huge charge out of it, and I'm so nearsighted I can't find the passage in my book. But tell us, if you're still unmuted, tell us his full name again.
Oh, I wrote it down. Let's see, it's Rene Robert Cavalier Sieur de LaSalle.
Okay, so imagine going with all these Americans, and I have to tell you something about these Americans. So I go on this very fancy tour of the Seine on this absolutely really fancy boat, and the challenge was that all of the Americans, except for one couple who the two of them kept their mouths shut, were very fervent Trump supporters. And when they found out that I had a connection with the New York Times, they didn't even want to have dinner with me. I had to make friends with the Australians because the Americans wouldn't receive me. However, there were two nice women, and one woman had been a school teacher. And when we go to Rouen, they start talking about this guy, René Robert Cavalier, blah, 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 as if we all are supposed to get excited. And everybody had these blank looks, and the tour guide didn't know what was going on, saying, but this is your hero. I mean, this is your explorer. And finally, I said, excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think you're talking about LaSalle. And this one woman was the school teacher, LaSalle, I know LaSalle. So it's so funny that here you could be there, and because he had this fancy title and name, that nobody knew who he was. But yes, LaSalle is like the boy hero of Rouen. And growing up, there's a LaSalle everywhere. I mean, where I grew up in Buffalo, there was a LaSalle Park in my neighborhood. He was a big time explorer.
We have a question from David, playing off your Macron comment. Do you find that being intelligent is viewed suspiciously in France as it is in the United States right now?
No, the French revere intellectuals, and in fact, in my book, the La Seduction book, I have a whole chapter about intellectuals and the sort of repartee and sharing and dialogue and debates between intellectuals, as long as it's done with an open spirit. You know, arrogance doesn't work. It's basically opening yourself up to listening to the other. And I think this is what I have found is a shame coming back to the United States. No matter what your politics are, it seems that, at least in some quarters, we've lost that ability to listen to the other. And, when I was chief diplomatic correspondent for the New York Times, I actually covered Biden. And it was in the days when you had, people like Dick Lugar and David Boren in the Senate. And, the Democrats and the Republicans actually talk to each other and listen to each other. And we've lost that ability, and journalists too, to listen to each other. But in France, they still talk in a way, I think, more than in the United States, with respect. And I'll never forget, early in my time in Paris, I went to some cocktail party and I met this woman, and she was really nice and, blah, blah, blah. And I said to her, so what do you do? Because, that's a question we always ask, we Americans. And she said, I'm an intellectual. And she really meant it. She was a professional intellectual. Yeah, that's what she did for a living.
Sorry. Sarah asked how you came up with the idea for this book.
Oh my gosh, you really want, do we have a couple of minutes?
Yes.
All right.
I thought you were going to say a couple of hours.
Well, a couple.
I was like, maybe.
Okay. I'm going to have to. I fell in love with the Seine when I was a very junior correspondent who had come from Chicago to Paris. But there's also a bittersweet story. And the reason I'm going to share it is not to put you all in a bad mood, but because, all of us in our lives have sorrows and sadnesses that we hopefully can overcome. So I'm going to read you the 2 opening paragraphs of my book. And I hope nobody cries, because there was a happy ending, because I met my current husband on the Long Island Railroad going out to the Hamptons. Thank the Lord. Okay. So this is the opening of the book. And now I have 2 beautiful daughters. My daughter, Gabriella, just said, come on, Gabriella, you can come and say hello if you'd like to say hello to everybody. Yeah, Gabriella's going to come and say a quick hello. Yeah.
Hello, Milwaukee.
Yeah, isn't this great? You've never been to Milwaukee, have you?
No.
We've been to Chicago, but not Milwaukee. Yeah, she's a brilliant photographer, but she really earns her living working for the economist Joe Stiglitz, so you got to tell all your kids, have a dream and then have a skill. Okay. In the spring, one spring, I was seduced by a river. I had come to Paris from Chicago to be a foreign correspondent for Newsweek magazine. I arrived with no sources, no lovers, no family, no friends, no mission except to start fresh in a city all the world loves. There had been a husband in Chicago, but he'd announced one day that he was leaving. I let him take the BMW, the butcher block table, the full-sized mattress, the walnut roll-top desk, the darkroom equipment, and a set of Wedgwood china. I kept the antique brass bed, a carpet, and much of the rest of the furniture. 4 months later, he remarried. I recounted the story of our breakup over and over until it became as smooth and harmless as a stone worn down by the sea. I was 28 years old and free to be my own person in Paris. And every day, I walked from my office on the Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré across the Pont de l'Alma to my apartment in the 7th arrondissement, and I'd stand on the bridge and I'd watch the sun setting behind the Eiffel Tower, and I'd say, it's going to be okay. And eventually, it was okay.
I'm reading a book called Chatter, and it talks about putting distance between you and bad things. So
what is the book?
It's called Chatter. It's coming out in February. It's a psychologist writing about internal dialogue and how to live more positively by using these techniques, just like you, of putting distance between yourself and the basically don't complain on Facebook a lot.
Well, I have to say it's only 2 paragraphs of this, because my husband said to me, if I wrote a chick lit book, nobody would buy the book. So it's just limited to 2 paragraphs.
Yeah, we might buy your book. We have one more question, and it's somebody said they're reading Les Miserables. This was Amy, and she wanted to know the most interesting reference or homage to Victor Hugo that you can think of. Just something interesting, Victor Hugo-esque.
Victor Hugo's daughter drowned in the Seine. She had just gotten married, and she and her husband were in a boat and outside of Rouen, and she couldn't swim. And the boat capsized, and they both drowned, and he never recovered. And that is, it's one of the saddest parts of my book, and it truly is was a tragedy that just broke him, and in a way that then affected his literature afterwards. But I don't want to end on a down note, because I have a chapter about death in my book, but I also have in the book, there's a few people who, particularly one guy, he goes out to commit suicide, and he gets on a bridge on the Seine, and he said, I was going to commit suicide today, but it was so beautiful out on the Seine. I just thought, you know what, maybe for another day. And this is what I want to leave you with, is this one thought that no matter how bad it is in life, there's always Paris, and Paris will be there, and Paris will be waiting for you, and Paris, you'll come back to Paris, and there will always be the beauty of Paris, and the charm and the romance, if not the sex under a bridge. Okay, now we even have somebody saying Demain de l'aube à l'heure. That was the poem he wrote about her. So about Victor Hugo, about his daughter.
I have one question that wasn't asked before we go.
Yes.
Are you working on your next book?
I'm just starting to think about the next book. And so I'm glad you asked this question, because, I wrote a book about a street, about a river, and now I'm going to write a book about a museum, Adventures in the Louvre. And so I want every one of you who has an interesting story about your first trip to the Louvre to send it to me, okay? Send me your great story about how you fell in love in the Louvre, you fell in love with a painting in the Louvre, you don't remember anything about the Louvre except you couldn't find the toilet and you were driving your mother crazy, because I want to gather all your stories and put it in my next book.
Fabulous. Erin, would you say a few words to close things out? I want to thank everybody for coming, but I bet Erin does too.
Yes, thank you so much, to Daniel and Elaine, and lots of good events coming up at Boswell and at the Alliance, both our websites, and hopefully we'll do more author events soon as well. It's so great to be able to connect with people all over the country and the world now.
Thank you all for coming. We wouldn't have a virtual bookstore or a virtual Alliance Francaise without you. Everybody was writing in French, or maybe it was Latin. And if they were taking classes at AF, if I was taking classes, I would know what they said, but you could take the classes and know what they said. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.